in the command. In other words, duties are binding for their own sake, as I just said a moment ago. The act is permissible, the act is prohibited because of the value assigned to it. Then we have to say, well, by whom? By whom? And this is where it's interesting, right? Because we would say, according to the Christian worldview, that God has infused his morality, just like certain natural laws. We would say morality is also one of those laws that's just infused into the creative order to regulate, human behavior, whether we're talking about those with the new birth or those without. And if you're saying, well, how does that flesh out? And passages like Romans 13 about government and the role of government, right? So this is the rule of God, but God exercises that through government. Now, not all governments are good. Some are tyrannical, yet in principle, God said governments, and governments then impose laws, and laws are created because there are certain values that we hold dear, right? Certain values, and based on those values, we say that's to be permitted, that's to be prohibited. And we're talking just in a general sense here. And we know that doesn't always work out. And we know that certainly there are generations that will seek to legislate their own sort of distorted view of morality. And then we find the breakdown in society. I mean, this is ethics, right? And applied ethics, we could talk about abortion. And so just because abortion is the law of the land doesn't make it ethical. Just because it is the law of the land doesn't mean that it hasn't been destructive. So it is possible that government oversight doesn't imply that the government determines what is right or wrong. And so we really have to understand this, but we're talking philosophically here, and basically what Kant is saying, that this categorical imperative is to ensure that no one person, one society, or whatever, one government would be the determining factor in what is moral or what is not. So how does this really work if you as an individual are saying, I'm ready to sign up, Immanuel Kant, I'm ready to sign up, ready to go full on into deontology and deontological ethics. And you say, well then, there is this sort of master concept of the categorical imperative, and then situationally in every aspect of life you apply all of these sort of lesser categorical imperatives. It becomes this rule or this binding principle instead of your heart, instead of your emotions, instead of foreseeing the consequences. It is this categorical imperative that drives you. If you remember, many years ago, you had these little bracelets, WWJD. What would Jesus do? And for Christians, it was like a shortcut. It was a simple little acronym to look and remind, hey, what would Jesus do in this situation? So imagine a categorical imperative of that import. Just say, well, all I have to do is to place Jesus in this situation and just say, well, what would he do? And of course, that's going to depend on your understanding of Jesus. And I would say that many wouldn't understand Jesus correctly, and many would simply just make their own Jesus, make their own Jesus. Well, I really think Jesus would just want me to do this. I think Jesus would, instead of the Jesus who stood for what is holy, what is true, what is righteous. And rather than make the hard decisions, or rather than choose the more difficult path of living morally straight in a immorally perverse or crooked generation, we may opt for the path that has lesser trials, lesser consequences that could come to rest on us for doing what is right. So Kant's version of the categorical imperative basically boils down to this guiding maxim, the WWJD, the what would Jesus do in the secular realm of things. So three ways to state it a little bit more simply than Kant would put it. One, for any maxim, in other words, here you are in this situation, and you want to determine what is the categorical imperative, what is the duty, how do I determine what is right to do? Again, the action, what is right to do, and that is obligatory on me. Now, I'm hesitating for a second because I don't want you to think that means every person kind of to determine for themselves, because then we're right back to relativism, we're right back to my truth, your truth. But remember, that's not where Kant is. But he's saying for any maxim to be true, you must be able to allow that it become a law for everyone. And what is that? It's almost like the golden rule in some respect. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, if that helps you, and you could think of it that way, what Kant is saying now is I need to universalize it. So I really need to think. I'm in a situation, and would I find it appropriate for everyone else, is almost as though everyone else is now in my situation, everyone, and I want them to act the way that I would act. It's one thing if you think you're the only one in the moral universe and you can act without any effect on anybody else. There's no rippling in the pond, so to speak. I can just act. It's just me, and it's not going to harm anybody. That's not what Kant is saying. What Kant is saying is to universalize such that everybody is in the exact same situation. What would you have them to do? Because if you choose what's obligatory for you in this situation, but then if by someone else acting the same way could come back on you and be harmful to you, then you'd say, no, I wouldn't choose that. I wouldn't choose that. So it really takes a certain degree of honesty and discretion, to be able to say, yes, this is I know it's a hard decision, but this is what I feel everyone should do in this particular situation. So I'm really not, I'll state it the way Kant says it. He says, act only on that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Is this how you would want others to act in the same situation? Or if it's person and person, and you're saying, is that how I would want that person to act back toward me? Now, this is just the basic level of this, and I don't know that we really locked in on it. I'm not satisfied I really locked in on that. But you get the general idea, too. Never treat people just as a means. So whatever you're thinking the universalization of this response should be, okay, two, helps to strengthen the goodness of that particular act or resolve. How? Never treat people just as a means, always treat them as a valuable end in themselves. Okay, so people, listen, when you talk about values, you're talking about intrinsic or extrinsic value. Okay, so when you think about other people, you think, are they intrinsically valuable or are they extrinsically valuable? Extrinsically valuable will be, yes, they're valuable because they make a good income, they have stuff, their status is great in society. Those are things extrinsic. Those are things outside of the person. When you go back to virtue ethics, you're talking about intrinsic, right? The person's character, something they have in and of themselves. This, however, is something a little bit even deeper than that. It's saying that you, as a person, have value in yourself, even if you're of this race, of this gender, of this age, of this occupation, of this nationality, of this income, so on, so on. All that is meaningless. Absolutely meaningless only in the eyes of other people that will judge you based on those categories. So we apply value to these things based on certain economic worth or social or political value. But he's saying all of that, no, it's the human being in and of themselves have intrinsic worth. You know, what our declaration would say, we have certain unalienable rights that is given to us by God that cannot be taken away, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's everyone, just by being human, whether they have Down syndrome, whether they're catatonic and in some comatose state, whether they're elderly and have or autistic or disabled or anything. No matter. They all, because they're human, are endowed by God with these things. So Kant would say, because of this, and you can see a little bit of this, that's going to seep into the framers of the Constitution and those that authored, and he and John Locke as well, those that authored the Declaration of Independence. Never treat people as a means. Why? Because when you treat someone as though they're a means, that may not be clear to you, but that's just saying, I need you to do this for me because you have extrinsic value. You can either give me something, do something for me, so on and so forth. And so when I come to thinking about what is morally appropriate or morally prohibited, first of all, I have to think in terms of what I would universalize that everybody else would do in this exact situation. That's number one. But number two is I can't base the decision on what a person brings to the table. I'll do this because, I'll justify this because this person can do this for me or something, because now I'm treating them as means or means to an end. So it's not altruistic. And Kant seems to be stepping into that realm. Altruism is, and we could question, is there ever the cross was an altruistic act where somebody basically performs a deed without any thought to themselves. So it's very difficult for us. Usually we have some kind of motive, some kind of angle. The closest things are things like someone who would give one of their kidneys for somebody they absolutely don't know. And a pure act of altruism. So this is what he's saying. He's testing this and saying that now you have to step into that realm of altruism. That makes it so very, very difficult. That is, you cannot have any ulterior motive that's based on the extrinsic value or what that person brings to the table. Well, I will do this for them because I know in the end it's going to benefit me in some way. So he says, no, that can't be the categorical imperative. It's already two things that really cinch up human nature here, or the adverse side of human nature. And then three, act as though you assume that everyone is following the moral law. So you get the sense that a categorical imperative is meant to rest on you to govern and determine, to a certain extent, to determine and to govern what is to be prohibited and what is to be permitted, what I am to do, what I am to not do. Okay, so now when you get into this idea of duty then, there's this issue of free will. There's this issue of free will versus determinism. The very idea of duty raised this problem for Kant. How can there be meaningful moral duties unless a person is first shown to be free? And so there was some discussion. Well, maybe we're not free at all. Maybe certain things just occur because they are part of the fabric of the natural realm. Can we look at people this way, as though they're just programmed or just predictable in terms of the outcomes given certain circumstances? Certain outcomes will be foreseeable. So we might doubt whether or not there are free choices being made anyway, someone would opine or argue. So this doubt arises from the application of causal determinism, the theory that consequences are entirely determined by their causes. In other words, if X happens, then Y will follow. And so people would say, but isn't that what happens in the natural world? Aren't there certain natural laws? If you drop something from a tall building, will it not descend at a certain rate unless acted upon by another force of equal velocity, something of that nature. I mean, we can predict this. This is what. So isn't human nature that way? And so Kant thought no. So he said human behavior is not determined in that way. I mean, sure, we could, remember the idea of character. Character is that if you're placed in a situation, what's the likelihood that you will or you won't, right? Depending on your character. So we could guess and make some pretty good guesses with regard to what we know. Any systemic behavior on the part of a person indicates the character. It's what's emitted from them, so it indicates this type of character. Yet we know conversely that doesn't always hold, because people can put on a show and they can do lots of things that seemingly are good, and yet their character can be horrible. And we know that is certainly true from Scripture. Just because people can perform certain things that are appealing to the population, certainly their heart is black with sin if it has not been forgiven by God and Christ's righteousness applied thereby. However, we're not doing theology here. We're just doing philosophy. And Kant is saying, and basically saying in his deontological ethical system, that this is based on the fact that humans can determine the categorical imperative. Humans can be duty bound. And in fact, this is the true impetus to moral performance. To solve the problem of determinism, Kant observed that we can envisage human behavior in two different ways. Firstly, if we observe other humans, then from our external point of view, their actions can appear determined. For example, we can see certain patterns. Someone is hungry, they eat, right? So we can discern certain patterns, and certainly it can appear that there is this type of determinism. Well, this just seems to always happen every time this, and so we can sort of be pulled into that and conditioned to thinking that everything is determined. But if I consider my own behavior, not just looking externally, but I consider my own behavior, I know that if I'm hungry, I could in fact refuse. I do have it within my being the ability to reject that food even if I'm hungry. So I know that I'm free and I'm rational. It's not automatic. Somebody put food in front of me. I'm hungry, therefore I eat it. It is not automatic, right? Something that's automatic is basically breathing. Have you checked within the last 30 seconds whether you're breathing or not, right? So we know that there are certain things that are predictable because they are part of our physiological composition. We're designed a certain way, but we are designed to think and are given the apparatus to think, as we talked about in the last lecture, the nous and the phronema and the cardia and all these Greek words that talk about the relationship of our heart and our will, in other words, our thelema, our will, and our heart and our thoughts and our inclination of our minds and all these types of things. We are given the apparatus to think, but we are not pre-programmed as to what we will think in a deterministic kind of sense. I know this gets up there, but nonetheless, it's important just to make these kinds of distinctions. So a few questions to consider as we evaluate, at this point, and then maybe some counterexamples or something. But is it really acceptable to say that the consequences do not matter in ethics? If it's purely duty, and we're duty bound, and we're free moral agents. We can know what that duty is, and we can act accordingly. But you're leaving the consequences totally out of it. They don't matter in ethics. So insofar as, listen, you have to make this distinction, because plenty of people will say this, but you're not, Kant is like a stone, like an ice cold stone. He's not taking into account somebody else's feelings or the consequences and so on, things of this nature. But keep in mind, you certainly can take into account, but not in determining what's right or what's wrong. Not in attempting to justify a particular action as a moral agent. So you'd say, well, I did this because. Because why? Well, it was intention to bring about a good end, and therefore it's good in this case. Wow, that just because you were intentioned, all of a sudden it makes it good regardless of the consequences or in spite of the consequences or something. There's no standardized morality there. And this is what Kant is saying. That just makes it wide open to moral relativism. It makes it wide open to taking a view of the truth that's not absolute whatsoever. It makes statements of moral fact ridiculous and irrelevant. It can only be fact if it's fact for you. Another question was, should duty always be preferred over emotion and sentiment, as though you have to just be this very stoic, non-emotional person? But emotion and sentiment, these are affective in nature. They're subjective. They're subjective influences on reason or cognition. So we may not feel that a decision is the right course of action to take, but duty prescribes that it is. So we elevate reason over intuition. So it's all about, the questions are all about what should be factored in to determine the value of an act, whether it's morally permissible or to be morally prohibited. Should we take into account consequences? Kant says no. Should we take into account emotions and sentiment? Kant says no. I could get probably graphic with